There are a couple of things my first video about vectors didn't address, and the book sure didn't address it, and I want to talk with you about those right now. The first one is, how do you use a vector as a parameter to a function? All of our programs now are using functions, so it might help to know how do we incorporate vectors into that. So let's start with a simple little program here. We'll put our prototypes up here. We'll have an input module. We'll call it get values or something. And we're going to send it a vector of ints. And then we'll have a processing thing. Let's say we're going to get, I don't know, we'll count how many of the things in the vector are equal to 10. So that's going to be an int count tens, we'll say. And we'll send that vector to that function. And it's going to return how many of the items in the vector are equal to 10. And then we'll have an output module, display results, and we'll send it the vector, oddly enough. Maybe we want to say what kind, and the count that we got from our processing function. Okay, so there's the layout of our program. So the first thing down here we're going to do is declare a vector of ints. We'll call it nums. Now remember, from the book and from the other video, right now nums doesn't contain anything. It's an empty vector. So I'm going to get some input for it, and I'll say get values, and we'll send it nums. And for right now, just to start off, let's do our output function. So I'll put display results, and we'll send it nums. And just we'll just send it 9, just so we can write the function. We'll put something else in there in just a minute. Okay, now I need to write those functions. So I come down here and I put void get values vector int nums. And my other function is going to be void display results. I need to send it a vector. And an integer we'll call count. Okay, let's write those. We're going to need an input value, so I'll say int n. And we'll make a loop here. I'm going to let the user enter values until they indicate that they want to stop. All right, so we've told them enter a value, and when you want to stop, push -999. I don't want to put that -999 into the vector. Now this is not like an array. I can't just say something like this because there is no slot anything in nums, because remember, nums is empty. So what I have to do is use my variable up here, n, to let them enter something. And then I'm going to add that to the vector by using that pushback function. And I'll push back the number that the user just entered. Now think about that for just a second. I have to let them enter a value into some dummy variable that I'm calling n, and then I can push n onto the vector at the end. Okay, now then, I'm going to keep doing that while what? Well, n doesn't equal negative 999. So I've got a do while loop. I know I want to do this at least once. It's going to stop when they enter negative 999. But now I said I didn't want to add that negative 999 to the vector, so I'm going to put an if statement here. So if n does not equal negative 999, then I'm going to add it to the vector. Otherwise, I'm not. Okay, so look through that. Make sure it makes sense to you. Especially this thing about having them enter a value into a dummy variable and then pushing it back onto the vector. All right, so we've let them enter the stuff. What am I going to do here? Cout, and I don't know how many they entered now. Cout, the values were, and then I can do a for loop that says for, and x starting at 0, x is less than num's size. And that'll, if they entered 50 numbers, that'll handle it. If they entered 2 numbers, that'll handle it. If they didn't enter any at all, my for loop won't run. Okay, and then I can just say cout nums x. That. Now I'm also sending that count, so I'm going to print it out. Good typing skills here. Okay, so that ought to print our stuff out. So let's run this and see what we get. Okay, so I'll enter 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, negative 999. So in our vector now, we should have 10, 20, 30, 40, 50. And what just happened? Look right here. The values were, and it didn't print out anything. There's something that we got to check into. And that says there were 9 values equal to 10. And why did it do that? Well, because back up here we sent it a 9, up here on line 15. So let's think about why it didn't print out any of the values in the vector. Can you all see why? Okay, you've discovered that arrays and vectors are alike in some ways and different in some ways. Well, one of the ways they're different is in the way their names are treated. With an array, if we just have an array name without the brackets, we know by now that the compiler treats that as the address of the first element in the array, which means when I send that array to a function as a parameter, I've got its address and I can modify it directly. So it's kind of like a reference parameter in that I'm getting its address. With a vector, on the other hand, it's more like a regular variable. It's an object variable, but it's still a variable, which means if I want a function to change it, I've got to do what? And the answer is I've got to make it a reference parameter. So I've got to come up here and say in my prototype, I want this to be a reference. I'm going to change it. Now we get a squiggly down here because our get values, the way we have it written, is not set up to be a vector. So let's fix that. We'll say this is a reference called nums. Now that's all we changed. We'll run the program again. Now that we've got our vector as a reference, and I'll do the same kind of thing. 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, negative 999. There we go. By making that vector a reference parameter, that indicated to the compiler that any changes I make inside of our input function, back over here, I wanted to actually take place for our original vector, just like any other variable. All right, so now let's write our count tens function. And it's going to return an integer. And we're sending it our integer vector. And so I'll declare a counter in here. And I always want to start a counter off at 0. Because at this point, none of them are greater than 10. And I can do a for loop. I can use, I better name my vector up here, hadn't I? I can say this is less than the vector's size if nums x equals 10. I'm going to add one to count. Counter. And then at the end I'll return counter. Simple loop here. It's going through the whole vector, just seeing which ones are equal to 10 and counting them. And again, if you're going to count something, always start your counter at 0. So back up here, I need another variable. I don't need to start it at 0 because I'm going to get its value right here. All right, so far it's looking all right, so we'll run it. And I'll put 10, 20, 30. I'm going to put another 10, 40, 50. I'll put another 10. I'll put a negative 6. So we've got 3 tens, and now I'll enter my negative 999. Let's see if our counting function worked. No, it didn't. Why not? Well, because back over here I left that a 9. Oh, the joys of programming. So I'll do my 10, 20, 30, another 10, 40, 50, 10. And we'll put another 10. So now we got 4 tens. I'll enter my negative 999. And it counted them correctly. Now this brings up the other thing I wanted to talk to you about vectors. And it's this. Every time we talked about a vector in this program, we had to type out vector int, vector int, vector int. Down here, vector int, vector int. When I declared my vector, vector int. You can do that if you want to, but C++ gives us another mechanism we can do, and the book didn't talk about this either. I can use what's called a typedef, meaning I'm defining my own type. And I can say vector int, and now I can give it a name. And so since this is a vector of integers, I'm just going to say intvec. Now, please understand what I'm doing. That means all throughout my program, any place I want a vector of ints, I can use intvec. So here, I can put intvec. And the compiler will know that I mean a vector of integers. I can do that same thing here. And I'm going to go through the rest of the program here and do that, and I'll be right back. All right, all done. So take a look. Every place I had vector of ints, I've substituted intvec. And the compiler knows that anytime it sees the name intvec, it means vector of integers. So when I declared my vector here, I put intvec. When I put it in the parameter list, intvec, and so on. Now this program should run just like it did before, so let's try. Okay, so I'm going to put 20, 3, negative 87, 45, and negative 999. Now I haven't hit enter yet, but notice there aren't any values that are equal to 10 in there. And that's what my output tells me. So what are the takeaways from this video, the big ones? Well, the first one is you can use a vector just like you would any other parameter. That means as a value parameter, which would be a copy of the vector, and that's what we saw the first time we ran this program when it didn't retain the changes, or as a reference parameter, which is the way we have it now there on line 24, where we're saying we're going to change what's in that vector. And the second big thing, if you choose to use it, is this idea of up here on line 6, using a typedef, which means you can name your own type. And it saves you some typing when you're typing in your program, but it also makes sense to another programmer looking at your code. All right, take these for what they're worth. They're just an attempt to help you program better. If you have questions, make sure you get with me. Thanks for watching.